Hi, I'm Donna Gates, creator of Body Ecology and host of the very first online Healthy Gut Summit. For over 20 years, I've been teaching people the importance of digestive health and eating a diet rich in healing probiotic foods. I believe the world is truly hungry for the simple science behind how to create a healthy gut and set the foundation for wellness. The source of wellness and disease so often begins in your digestive tract. So whatever your goal, whether you have a chronic or serious health problem, you want to age well, you're planning on having a baby, you want to be fit and control your weight, you must have a healthy gut. The interviews in our Healthy Gut Summit will not only inform you, they will transform your life. Hi, this is Donna Gates with the Healthy Gut Summit, and I am going to be speaking today with Jeffrey M. Smith. You probably already know him quite well because he's the international best-selling author and filmmaker. He actually produced a lengthy documentary called Genetic Roulette, and this documentary was seen by millions and millions of people. We'll talk more about that as we get into our discussion. But I just wanted you to know that he's the executive director for the Institute of Responsible Technology. And if you want to go to that website where you're listening to this, you just go to responsibletechnology.org, not com, but responsibletechnology.org. This man is an amazing man. He works tirelessly to bring information into the world about GMOs. His research is absolutely meticulous. That's important to know, too, as you listen to us discuss this issue of GMOs. He really is the leading consumer advocate for all of us. He has been for a long, long time in helping promote healthier foods and getting us and making us aware of the dangers of genetically modified foods. Jeffrey, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Great. Perfect. I've got a million questions here. They just kept coming and coming and coming because I really want to do a good job representing everybody who's listening to this, their questions. So I'd like to start off with some simple basics before we get into the really juicy stuff. So can you tell us, all of us really, just a few basics about genetically modified foods? For example, what is a genetically modified food?
Well, a GMO, or genetically modified organism, is one where genes from one species are transferred into the DNA of other species. So the crops on the market have genes from bacteria or viruses that primarily either allow the crops to be sprayed with Roundup herbicide or some other herbicide, or they produce their own toxic insecticide that kills bugs. Now, the process of genetic engineering, which is typically done with a gene gun, shooting millions of genes into a plate of millions of cells and then cloning the cells into a plant, or through bacterial infection followed by cloning, creates massive collateral damage in the DNA of the plant, and that can lead to all sorts of unpredicted side effects, and so too can the inserted gene cause problems.
So how did all this get started? I mean, this is crazy. Who came up with this brilliant idea to do this to us and to our food?
Well, the primary company that has brought GMO food into the marketplace is Monsanto. They were the company that told us that PCBs, Agent Orange, and DDT were safe and got it wrong. And they are the big pioneers of GMOs. There's about 5 or 6 companies that market GMOs, but they're the big gorilla on the block, and they have the patents to most of it. And in fact, it was the Monsanto former attorney, Michael Taylor, who was put in charge of the FDA policy when the GMO policy was created. And his policy basically claimed that the agency wasn't aware of any information showing that GMOs were significantly different. Therefore, no safety studies or labeling was necessary, that Monsanto could determine on its own whether its foods are safe. And then Michael Taylor became Monsanto's vice president, and now he's back at the FDA as the U.S. food safety czar. Unfortunately, the policy that he promoted was based on a lie. We know because of a lawsuit forced 44,000 secret internal memos into the public domain, and they showed that the overwhelming consensus among the scientists even working at the FDA was exactly the opposite. They were concerned that GMOs were very different than normal breeding, and they could lead to allergens, toxins, new diseases, and nutritional problems, and urged long-term study, but were ignored.
Okay, so this started when? Back in the 90s? When did it all start going crazy like this?
Well, in 1994, a tomato was introduced that was genetically engineered from Calgene, but it has since been taken off the market. Actually, it left the market in 97. 1996 was the big year that soy and corn and cotton and soon canola was introduced. And those have been the four main GMO crops all along. And more recently, alfalfa and sugar beets. There's also papaya from China or Hawaii and a little zucchini and crookneck squash. Unfortunately, those are the only 9 genetically modified food crops. We also have genetically engineered bovine growth hormone, which is still injected into some dairy cows, and that can change the nature of the milk, making it possibly a promoter for cancer and other problems.
This is such a serious problem. But I'm sure there's a lot of people that just don't think it is a problem. And there's also some people that have this thought in their mind, well, we have all these brilliant scientists that are advising us to do this. They're spending a lot of money and time developing GMOs. Is there ever a time when they're good for us?
Well, it's certainly possible that genetic engineering has some beneficial outcomes for human gene therapy, where a defective gene might be replaced, but that, of course, is limited only to the person who's willing to take the risk. The technology is very immature and prone to side effects, and while it's important to use in the laboratory and to use it as part of studying, it's completely irresponsible to use it to produce food or even release it outdoors, because once it's released, the self-propagating pollution of the gene pool in the form of pollination, cross-pollination, and as well as seed movement can render the gene pool permanently contaminated for all future generations. And so it should never have been deployed in the current state of understanding. Maybe sometime in the future it can be created with fair amount of certainty, but now the certainty is in the opposite direction. As the Royal Academy of Sciences in Canada said, the default prediction for GMOs should be unpredicted side effects.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And I'm sure too that there's the conspiracy theory people that are saying, why are they doing this to us right now? Particularly when they see the other science. I mean, I'm sure they're, changing things and making their science look like it's safe. But then they see this other science. They see a huge movement that you've created, and millions of people are behind. Millions of companies are behind in the health industry world. So, why is there? Do you mind me asking you that? Do you think there's some kind of conspiracy theory going on?
Well, there certainly is a concerted effort where it involves corruption of politicians, media, governments. We've seen that firsthand. I mean, Monsanto got convicted or they identified that they had bribed 140 Indonesian officials. They were accused of bribing Canadian scientists working at Health Canada. We have seen over and over again how they have put their own people essentially into the positions to regulate and approve GMOs around the world. The State Department is deployed on behalf of the biotech industry. If you read the WikiLeaks, you can see how they are trying to promote the Monsanto agenda in all the continents. So this is, we could say, an integrated marketing strategy. We don't have to call it a conspiracy theory, where ultimately the prize is enormous power and wealth, because food is the largest traded commodity of everything in the world. And if you own the seeds, you control the food, and you control the food, you control the people. So it's an amazing opportunity to corner the most important commodity on earth.
That's extraordinary. I mean, I knew this was a serious problem, but every time I talk to you, Jeffrey, it just sends chills up and down my whole body, because I realize I've heard you say that this is maybe the most serious thing we're facing today. And when you explain it that way, I can see that it is. Do you mind, just to go, if we can stay on this sort of this simplicity of GMOs right at first, right now, do you mind kind of listing again the foods? I mean, I know people can go to your website again and get that listing. It's a beautiful website. It's amazing amount of information. Everybody should spend some time reading to understand this. But just again, that's the key crops. You said there are 9 of them that we have to avoid.
Sure. Soy and its derivatives, corn and its derivatives, cotton seed oil, canola oil, sugar from sugar beets, which is most sugar, alfalfa, which is used as hay for animals, papaya, zucchini, and yellow squash. Now, the papaya is only from Hawaii or China, and the corn does not include popcorn. Now, aspartame is also from a genetically modified bacteria, and there's bovine growth hormone, which is found in cows that have produced milk, and there's also animal milk and meat from animals that have been fed GMOs, and so that's another huge category where there's risks for our health.
Well, but a couple of those, foods in the list there, like soybeans, for example. One of the concerns I always have is for vegetarians and vegans because they don't eat animal, protein for their main protein, and so they're getting it very often from soy foods. It's huge for them. So I wonder, do you have anything to say about that? Because I think that in soy milk, babies that are fed soy milk, so there is even the soy milk formulas, GM, are they genetically modified mostly?
Well, most of the soy infant formula is genetically engineered, which is tragic. And the issue with soybeans are genetically engineered as Roundup ready. And what that means is that you can spray the soybean field with Roundup herbicide, which is Monsanto's herbicide, and it's Monsanto's seed. Now, Roundup has been marketed as safe, but there's now overwhelming evidence that, as some scientists say, it may be the most chronically toxic chemical on Earth because of its prevalence and its ability to cause so many diseases. So we could take a moment, if you'd like, to talk about the dangers of Roundup Ready soybeans and Roundup.
Well, but Jeffrey, just to make sure this is clear for me and everybody listening. So the soybeans are genetically modified, but they're also sprayed with the Roundup. So we're talking about two different ways, sort of two different hits here, right?
Exactly. And both carry risks. They're both independently, they carry risks. And in fact, in one study over 2 years, they actually tested Roundup Ready corn that had been sprayed with Roundup. They tested Roundup Ready corn that had not been sprayed with Roundup, and they tested Roundup without the Roundup Ready corn. And all three experimental groups developed damage to their liver, kidneys, and pituitary. They died at an earlier age, and they had multiple massive tumors. So the Roundup alone and the genetic engineered corn in this case alone can cause problems. Now, in the case of soybeans, the process of genetic engineering causes massive collateral damage in the DNA, as we said. And so the soybean that's genetically engineered not only is tolerant of Roundup, but it has up to 7 times the amount of a known allergen called trypsin inhibitor. And trypsin inhibitor can block the action of the protein digesting trypsin, which can mess up gut digestion and cause a cascading effect through the digestive tracts. It also has lower amounts of protein and essential amino acid. It also has about a doubling of a soy anti-nutrient, which is something that blocks the absorption of other key nutrients. It also produces higher levels of lignin, and the metabolic pathway that produces lignin produces rotenone, which is linked to Parkinson's disease. So all of that is from the generic process of genetic engineering. But if you add to that is the Roundup is sprayed on the plant, and then it gets absorbed into the plant, and only 15 or 20% leave through the roots. The rest is stored in the plant, including the food portion. And so the soybean and the soybean oil and the things that are made from soybeans can have much higher residues of Roundup than if it were not Roundup ready.
Wow, I've been following your work for years, Jeffrey, and of course now, personally knowing you, I'm just shocked. I mean, I really didn't, you were explaining it so beautifully. It's even more serious than I ever realized, and I thought I was up on this. So absolutely, crystal clear, one key takeaway here is that no baby should ever have soy formula. They shouldn't have it anyway, and they shouldn't have any soy formula that's just not genetically modified. And it's hitting us in so many directions. And it's been generations now that babies have been raised on soy formula, and particularly in, even longer than that in the Asian countries like China and Japan and all. It's been a major source of food for babies. So who knows the long-term effect? I mean, have we looked at a whole population of children to see what's happening to them because of the taking a food like this?
We have graphs showing correlational data linking autism. Actually, it links autism, diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, allergies, inflammatory bowel, irritable bowel, chronic constipation, peritonitis, deaths from intestinal infection, deaths from Parkinson's and from senile dementia, and others. And they all track very, very tightly with either the introduction and growth of Roundup use in the US or the introduction and growth of genetically engineered soy and corn, or both. And the slopes of the lines are very, very closely paralleled. Now, that's correlational, but if you look at these same type of diseases and disorders, and you look at the animal feeding studies, as the American Academy of Environmental Medicine did, they said that the animals are getting sick from gastrointestinal problems, immune problems, reproductive disorders, accelerated aging, organ damage, and problems with cholesterol and insulin regulation. Very much the same type of categories we're seeing correlationally in the US population. And probably more telling is that when people get rid of GMOs, and we've heard this by the thousands, they get better from these same diseases and disorders. We've heard that from them and from their doctors and nutritionists. Likewise, when livestock are taken off of GM soy and corn, and also pets, they too get better from these type of diseases and disorders. Now, what we can talk about now is why would genetically engineered foods create such a wide variety of problems, and so many of them are linked to the gut? And so it's a very good launching point, because we have the background of all these disorders and diseases. Let's take a look at the two main toxins in GMOs to see what kind of havoc they can wreak.
Okay, and they are, what are the two main toxins? Let's take one at a time.
Well, we started with one, Roundup, and we haven't enumerated what's wrong with that. So let's
do that.
So Roundup is a chelator. It binds with minerals, all sorts of minerals, from selenium to cobalt to manganese, magnesium, calcium, zinc, and it makes it unavailable for assimilation or use. And so we end up eating Roundup-ready crops that are basically weak and sick because they're nutrient deprived. That creates nutrient deprivation also with the animals, the livestock in the US, so they're also chronically weak and sick because of nutrient deficiency. We also end up consuming Roundup, which can further bind with minerals inside of us, making us minerally deficient. Now, in addition to that, by being a chelator, it's also an antibiotic. And it's a very, very broad spectrum, powerful antibiotic, and it's selective in what it kills. It kills the beneficial gut bacteria. So it kills the lactobacillus, the bifidobacteria, the bacteria that promotes reductions of inflammation. That's gone. It does not suppress botulism, salmonella, E. coli, the negative stuff. Now, with livestock, they found that the botulism toxin, which is produced from Clostridium botulinum, can go completely haywire and kill animals after Roundup is included in the meal, because what happens is the Roundup kills a beneficial bacterium in the gut, which normally keeps the Clostridium botulinum in check. Without that beneficial bacteria, the Clostridium botulinum goes wild, and so does the bot toxin, which is one of the most dangerous toxins on Earth. It's linked not only to botulism poisoning in animals, it's linked to sudden infant death syndrome, chronic fatigue, and other problems in humans. Now, in addition to the killing of the beneficial gut bacteria, it can create an overgrowth of the negative gut bacteria, and that in turn can cause hydrogen sulfide gas, which is as toxic as cyanide gas, which can irritate and inflame the mucous membranes. When the intestines are irritated, that can produce less of the CCK, or the cholecystokinin, which means that the digestive enzymes that are normally initiated from CCK become less from the pancreas. So the entire digestive capacity of the gut is reduced. It can also create zonulin, which can cause a separation of the cells in the intestinal walls, causing leaky gut. And leaky gut is linked to all sorts of diseases and disorders. If you have undigested food proteins entering the bloodstream, then that can provoke an immune response, inflammation response, autoimmune disease. It's also linked to autism, cancers, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and other problems. Now, in addition to changing the gut bacteria balance, it can also suppress the ability of the gut bacteria to produce the aromatic amino acids like tryptophan. And most of the body's tryptophan is produced by gut bacteria, but Roundup dismantles the metabolic pathway that produces tryptophan, as well as two other aromatic amino acids. Tryptophan is a precursor to serotonin and melatonin. So with reduced amounts of serotonin and melatonin, that can affect not only our mood and behavior, but our sleep cycle. And serotonin also allows the body to know that it's full and doesn't have to eat anymore. So it could possibly affect eating habits. Now, Roundup also can block the proper functioning of the CYP enzymes, and those enzymes are involved in detoxing the body. So when the liver is unable to use the CYP enzymes properly, then every other toxin in the body can be amplified in its impact because the presence of Roundup or its active ingredient glyphosate can block the ability of the body to remove it. In fact, there was a study that was recently done that also linked glyphosate with chronic kidney failure that was happening in these plantations where they were spraying it for rice and for sugarcane. And there was huge death rate. And they found that it seemed to be binding with arsenic, getting through the liver, and ending up becoming toxic to the kidneys. Glyphosate is also an endocrine disruptor. When female mice were fed GM soybeans prior to pregnancy, more than half of their babies died within 3 weeks compared to only a 10% death rate in the controls. Hamsters by the third generation, some had hair growing in their mouths, most were sterile, and they also had a 4 or 5 times rate of infant mortality. So we have smaller babies and fewer babies in mice that ate Roundup Ready corn. We have changes in the testicles and uterus and ovaries, the damage to the young sperm cells, change even in the color of the testes, changes in the compositional makeup of the liver, pancreas. So all of that has been found with Roundup Ready crops. So with Roundup just by itself, if you look at the biochemical properties, as MIT scientist Stephanie Seneff and another scientist, Anthony Samsel, did, in their 2 papers, they linked glyphosate, the active ingredient, to heart disease, cancer, obesity, diabetes, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autism, digestive disorders, infertility, gluten-related disorders, and kidney dysfunction, as well as aggression and depression.
Wow, that's just extraordinary. I don't even need to ask you a bunch of questions around that because it was so beautifully stated and so extraordinarily complete in many ways. What I'd like to encourage everybody that's listening to this to do is listen to this over and over and over again. Each of our interviews are with the top experts in the world in the subject. And this is amazing information in one simple place that you can listen to over and over and over again because it's so packed with information. It's going to take you listening to it 3 or 4 times to grasp what Jeffrey Smith is saying here, because I'm beginning to totally agree with you. I think, wow, there's so many problems in the world. How can you say that GMOs are maybe the most serious, most serious problem, and we need to take great attention, put great attention to this? But after listening to you, I totally am beginning to agree with that, and I do agree with that because it's affecting the gut. We know from this whole summit that the gut is where health starts and where disease begins, and what it's doing to the bacteria. One thing I just want to add to what you said too, Jeffrey, is that autism, I'm very familiar with autism, and I do want to say that almost all the children I've ever worked with, and we've had thousands go through our Bedrock site, that thousands of families come through there, and doctors and other practitioners too, that these children are mostly fed soy formula because from the very beginning of their life, they don't digest foods well because they don't have that healthy inner ecosystem. So they're fed soy formula, and then they go on food, which is probably genetically modified because their parents don't know any better, but maybe even so, sprayed. So everything you've really been describing has been about the pesticides. So you're also saying not just avoid GMO, we have to avoid sprayed crops of all kinds too.
And it's unfortunate that Roundup is now approved for use on 160 different types of crops, not just the Roundup Ready crops, as a ripening agent. So it's sprayed on wheat, it's sprayed on lentils, on rye, on barley, on sweet potatoes, on berries. And so buying organic has never become more important than in the last couple of years as Roundup's becoming increased in use, not in conventional crops. Now, in addition, I want to talk to that autism piece. We have in our film Genetic Roulette, The Gamble of Our Lives, which is at geneticroulettemovie.com, we have 3 parents of autistic children, including a doctor, describe how when their autistic kids are taken off of GMOs, in these cases there was a dramatic improvement in either the gastrointestinal disorders or the behavior or both. And we have found, in fact, one of the authors of the study that I described about all the different relationships of glyphosate and diseases, she had become an expert on autism, and she understood exactly why the physiological changes in their system caused the behavioral problems. But she couldn't figure out what caused the physiological changes. And she was sitting in a lecture by Roundup expert Don Huber, and she told me she was at the edge of her seat for 2 hours. She couldn't move because he was describing the mechanism that caused all the physiological changes that she was seeing in autistic kids. It fit absolutely perfectly. And then she and her colleague then looked at gluten-related disorders and said, I asked her at the end of an interview that hasn't yet been posted, I said, is there anything in gluten-related disorders, in celiac, any physiological change that you found that couldn't be explained by glyphosate? And she said, no, every single change that had been recorded in as high in celiac patients and gluten-related disorders was found could be linked to consumption of glyphosate.
Well, I want to add to that too, that some people might think, well, I'm not interested in autism. I don't have a problem in our family with it. But I just want everybody to know that autism begins in the womb. And every single child, meaning every single one of us, has a digestive tract in the womb. And so what the mother's eating too is actually affecting her baby. There's a lot of research on that as well. So autism begins also in the womb. So this isn't just something that started after the baby was born, but even in the womb too.
Now, in addition to those gastrointestinal disorders, there's a couple that I want to add. When mice were fed genetically modified Roundup Ready soybeans, there was a dramatic reduction in their digestive enzymes. When fish were fed glyphosate, there was also a reduction in protease, lipase, and amylase, the digestive enzymes involved in proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. In addition, Roundup damaged the microvilli, which are the little fingers coming off the walls of the intestines, which do the absorption of the food. So it's really a perfect storm. It causes damage to the gut bacteria, the walls of the intestines, the holes in the intestines, the microvilli coming off the intestines, the pancreatic enzymes, and it's all basically a perfect storm for gut problems. Now, as I've traveled around the country at close to 100 events in the last 2 years where I asked the audience, how many of you have removed GMOs from your diet and felt better or had symptoms go away or start to reverse? And I get hundreds and hundreds of people sharing their stories in public. The number one complaint that has gotten better has been gastrointestinal disorders. And that includes gas, acid reflux, irritable bowel, inflammatory bowel, Crohn's disease, basically the full gamut. And it could be either the Roundup Ready crops, or the other toxin that I want to talk about is the internally produced pesticide in corn and cotton called Bt toxin.
Mm-hmm. Good. Because doesn't that just blow up the stomach of the insect? So why wouldn't it be rupturing and causing inflammation inside of us?
Precisely. What it does is it actually, rather than blowing it up, it pokes little holes in the cell walls, breaking down the integrity, destroying the integrity of their gut, and that kills the insects. And in the meantime, some of the gut bacteria from inside their stomachs gets into the areas outside their stomachs through those little holes, and it wreaks havoc. Now, it wasn't supposed to have any effect on humans or mammals, but they find it turns out that it does poke holes in human cells. Now, this is extremely worrisome because, again, we have the potential for leaky gut, holes created in the cell walls of the intestines, and it's only one cell thick. Now, the question is, are things getting into the bloodstream from these holes? Well, we do know that in the blood tested in Canada, they found that in the blood of 93% of the pregnant women tested was Bt toxin as well as Roundup. So it may have actually gone through the holes created by the Bt toxin or the Roundup. And that, of course, can lead to problems in the blood because a mouse study showed that red blood cells are damaged by Bt toxin. Perhaps more importantly, the Bt toxin was found in the blood of 80% of the pregnant women's fetuses that they were carrying. And if it gets into the blood, it can get into through the blood-brain barrier, which is not well developed in the fetus. So you may have this hole-poking toxin in the brains of the offspring of the next generation.
And also just the whole thing about the leaky gut. Anytime you inflame the gut and you make the barrier of the gut leaky, toxins get into the blood. They then circulate around the body, and they circulate through the blood-brain barrier, affecting the brain. The blood-brain barrier is much more permeable than people even have an idea. But something that I think is really, really important to discuss, and in the little bit of time that we have left, is I heard Stephen Sinatra say, 6 months or so ago in a lecture I was listening to, that, something's going on with our DNA. So many people can't detoxify anymore. And of course, we're looking at the genes. I mean, I'm really into nutritional genomics and looking at all the genes that, we've identified, and particularly all the enzymes that have genes that have to do with the enzymes that help us detoxify in the liver, the phase 1 enzymes and the phase 2 and so on. And people are really, really having a serious toxin problem with that today. So here we have a threatening toxin, the worst ever in our life, the food supply of things that we're taking into our body, and we don't have this ability to detoxify. Something's changing our DNA. I totally agree with Dr. Sinatra when he said that. Also, we have on this Healthy Gut Summit an interview with Alex Verlinsky. We're talking about the human ropeworm. Now, this is sort of a phenomenon all over the internet. People are looking, sending pictures of this stuff that's coming out of him. It's definitely a worm. It's been, it looks like a worm. It takes decades to develop into a worm. It starts off as a gelatinous type substance in children. So all the autistic parents are doing entomizanol now and getting this worm in this particular stage of its development out. And then by the time people are in their 20s, they're getting the adult ropeworm out. The little bit of DNA testing they've done on it is it's part human, part DNA. But one of the things I've been, wondering forever since I've been following this for the last couple of years is, and having, I work with a colon therapist that literally has thousands and thousands of pictures of these ropeworms, because he's done over 30,000 colonics, and they're coming out of everybody. So the big question is why? And I think maybe you have the answer for that, because you're basically saying that both the Roundup and the GMOs that we've been eating and that we're exposed to and probably don't even know, even those of us that are careful to avoid them, are probably still getting them. And they may be the cause of this strange, bizarre intestinal ropeworm that's beginning to be seen in everybody. So would you... I mean, that's just something that really needs to be looked into. But that's another thing, too, though, to add to your huge, long list of issues, is that we do carry parasites in us. I always try to explain to people that inside our body is our soil. Unlike plants, we're not rooted in the ground and get our nutrients from the soil. Soil has parasites. Soil has bacteria in it. We carry our soil around with us since we move around, but we're supposed to have healthy soil with healthy bacteria, and some, worms are probably apparently appear to be very normal. But now we're perhaps changing these worms with the genetically modified foods and with this toxin from the pesticide.
I actually haven't discussed with anyone ever the role of GMOs with parasites. And I'd love to speak to a parasitologist and some of the people that are introducing this. And this is what I do. I sit with them and we look at the characteristics that I know about GMOs and that they know about a particular malady. And we try and match up the research to see if there might be a relationship. That's what we did with gluten. And if you go to glutenandgmos.com, I wrote a 25-page paper with support from 4 experts linking the consumption of GMOs to exacerbating or promoting gluten-related disorders.
So GMO is gluten is a genetically modified food.
No, actually, wheat is not. Wheat is not genetically engineered. It is selectively bred, and it might be bred from more gluten in the United States. But what happens is, if you look at the characteristics of gluten-related disorders, they're typically leaky gut, certainly for celiac, suppressed digestive enzymes, damage to the gut back to the microvilli, and gastrointestinal disarray with the gut bacteria, as well as an immune system engagement. All of those are linked to GMOs in general, as well as to glyphosate. So, and then if you look at the Stephanie Seneff paper and the Anthony Samsel paper online at glutenandgmos.com, then you also see a lot of the other deficiencies, the chemical, like the vitamin D deficiency, the vitamin B12 deficiency, and other things that are also connected between gluten-related disorders and glyphosate. Now, you did mention altering DNA, and I want to discuss that briefly because there are 2 or 3 ways that GMOs could alter DNA. The first is it can alter the DNA of gut bacteria by potentially inserting the transgenes into gut bacteria. What I mean is this. In order to create a GMO, you take bacterial DNA or viral DNA or a combination, and you insert it into corn or cotton or whatever. Now, normally, if you eat a plant, the plant gene does not transfer into the DNA of gut bacteria. Now, bacteria transfer genes all the time. It's part of the way that they communicate and change. But plant genes very rarely transfer into gut bacteria, and if they do, they rarely express. Now, the reason they rarely transfer is because there has to be a similarity in most cases for the genetic code. But they're different. They're quite different between plants and bacteria. But the genes that are inserted into GMOs come from bacteria. So it overcomes that obstacle for transfer. And so genes may obviously more readily transfer from the genetically engineered crop into the gut bacteria. Now, the reason why plant genes would not express themselves once they did transfer into gut bacteria is because the on switch, or the genetic promoter that's found in plants, does not work in bacteria. But the bacterial genes that are inserted into GMOs, they carry a viral promoter which does work in bacteria. And there's also some other technical issues about not having introns in between the codons. It's a bit too technical. But basically what happens is this, Donna. The normal natural barriers that prevent plant genes from transferring into gut bacteria have been dismantled with GMOs. The only human feeding study ever conducted on commercialized GMOs found that genes, in fact, or part of genes do transfer from genetically modified soybeans into the DNA of human gut bacteria. In this case, that gut bacteria was unkillable with glyphosate, suggesting but not proving that after the gene had transferred from the soybeans to gut bacteria, it was still functioning. Now, if that's the case, it means that it's continuing to produce GM proteins in our gut long after we've stopped eating GMOs. Now, how does this affect gut health? Well, if you eat a corn chip, and the corn chip is made from corn that produces genetically engineered, it produces Bt toxin. That's the Bt toxin, that's the pesticide that pokes holes in human cells. So there's a gene inside the corn chip and the corn tortilla and the corn polenta and the corn on the cob that can produce a toxin. What if the gene, like the Roundup Ready gene, what if the corn gene, the Bt toxin gene, transfers to the DNA of gut bacteria and continues to function? If it does, and this has never been tested, it might convert our intestinal flora into living pesticide factories. Now, that means that we may be producing Bt toxin 24/7 inside our own gut. Now, this might explain why 93% of the pregnant women tested in Canada had Bt in their blood. You see, Bt should wash out of the blood very quickly. And if they have 93% have it in their blood, they must be eating Bt very regularly. So the authors of the study speculated that they were getting the Bt from milk and meat from animals that have BT as their feed. But I think another plausible explanation is that they got the BT in their blood because they were producing it 24/7 in their own gut bacteria. So that's a way that the GM genes may not transfer into our own DNA, although that's another possibility. But it is clear that it can transfer into gut bacteria, and it may continue to function.
Well, that's another amazing amount of information. You know, we've talked about my belief, and I know this hasn't been studied, and I think it's very important to study it, is that when you're eating fermented foods, the bacteria in these foods, one of their key jobs is to scavenge out toxins. And they know what's good and what's not good. They're very well trained for that. So if somebody is eating food because they can't afford maybe organic food, they can't get to a farmer's market where they can buy fermented foods, and so they are eating it. Perhaps, I would love to prove this in research, that by eating fermented foods, cultured vegetables, for example, putting this tremendous diversity of bacteria into the gut, they're very robust because they're first generation right off the plants. They're bacteria that have been working together in an amazing symbiotic relationship. Now they're eaten, in the cultured vegetables, make it down in the food. They're mixed with the food. They make it down into the gut, through the gut, out of the body. I would hope that they would be doing their job, which is they can scavenge out, they can get mercury, out of if somebody's eating fish, and because that's one of their key jobs, looking for eggs and parasites and so on too. And so this makes me, I know we talked about this, finding somebody that can do the research and expose the, put some cultured vegetables and some, pathogenic food together and see what the bacteria do to it. So I'm you're making me even more inspired to find a researcher or university or something that can do this work for us, because we've got to have a solution. I mean, I want us to end up the interview, because what you're doing, Jeffrey, is just extraordinary. And I can't even say on behalf of everybody listening how truly, truly grateful we are that you've been out here doing this work. Not just, I know how hard you work. I know you go anywhere, anytime, constantly speaking to people, teaching this information. You've been doing it for a long, long time, and you're in amazing shape, and I've never seen anyone as dedicated as you are. But we have so much gratitude. We are indebted to you so tremendously for being a consumer advocate for us. But what do you want us to do for you? I mean, how can we help you in this tremendous effort that you're making for us?
Well, thank you for asking, because we now are looking at a master plan to stop GMOs in the United States and most countries in food and animal feed within 5 years. And I can tell you that we are very confident that with the proper budget, we can accomplish it. And so at responsibletechnology.org, people can make a donation. They can sign up for our newsletter to keep informed. And for larger donations, they should please contact us to get the details of this master plan, which I can briefly sketch here for those who have interest. Because of educating people about the health dangers, the number of people wanting to avoid GMOs has skyrocketed. In fact, the number of people who say they're avoiding or reducing GMOs went from 15% of Americans in 2007 to 39% in 2013. Non-GMO products that are labeled as such grew faster than any other health or wellness labeled product in 2012, second fastest in 2013. We've hit the tipping point in the natural food industry. Thousands and thousands, more than 16,000 products are verified as non-GMO. To find them, you can go to our shopping guide at non-GMOshoppingguide.com or the iPhone application Shop No GMO. So non-GMOshoppingguide.com or Shop No GMO. So having tipped the natural food industry, we are now focusing on the conventional food industry. There are a few products that are not sold in health food stores, but are only sold in conventional brands, in conventional supermarkets, that have declared themselves non-GMO. The original brand of Cheerios, the original brand of grape nuts, Target's whole home brands will be non-GMO this year. So Smart Balance will be non-GMO within a month or so. So these are like the test cases, particularly grape nuts that has labeled non-GMO project verified on the front of the package so passersby can see. If any of these products start to gain momentum in the marketplace and increase sales because of their non-GMO claim, then we can see a tipping point happening very quickly because the rest of the food industry will realize they don't want to be second in their product category to declare non-GMO and sustain a market loss. So we are now focusing on the targeted demographic groups that would be shopping in the conventional supermarkets where we can easily change their diet if we can give them the information we have. We're talking about moms, pet owners, chronically ill people, healthcare professionals, and certain religious groups that think GMO really means God move over. So if we can reach out and we know who these people are, we know exactly what we need to say to them, we know approximately what numbers we need, and it's just a matter of having our nonprofit receive the funding to have the staff time and the production capacity to produce the mini documentaries so that moms who have incredible experiences taking their kids off of GMOs and finding such improvements in behavior and health and gastrointestinal disorders, conveying that to other moms. We have veterinarians talking about how pets can be dramatically improved in their health on non-GMO pet food. We have all sorts of resources that we want to use to not only link autism with GMOs and gluten with GMOs, and we have that on our website already, but gastrointestinal problems in general, allergies, infertility, weight problems, certain cancers. They're all there. It's in the numbers, and no one is putting it together. So the communities suffering from these are continuing to eat GMOs, and many of them, we believe, will feel better and also actually get better based on our experience with case studies and testimonials by switching to non-GMO diets. So we see that if we are funded, we can easily hit a tipping point of consumer rejection in the conventional food industry within a year or two, and within the animal feed within 5 years.
So this is brilliant, because I know that originally the fight was to get labeling of genetically modified foods, and that was kind of a lost battle. So the other direction, going to the companies that are producing the foods that are completely free of GMOs and putting labels on all those products, this is how we're winning the battle. This is brilliant. I love this. And as I didn't know you were moving into the market, the mass market, because I've always been concerned about that. I know people don't have the money sometimes to buy organic and so on. So that's brilliant. But here's a question. How Cheerios, for example, if they're going, non-GMO, is that costing the consumer any more money? Are they charging a few more dollars for that box of Cheerios?
Nope. They haven't raised the money a bit. In fact, 64 countries require labeling, and we know of no country where the foods were increased in their price when required labeling occurred. So sometimes, for some companies to switch to non-GMO right now, if corn, for example, is their primary product, it would cost them more. But so far, no one has actually increased the prices because of the switch to U.S. consumers. And we don't expect, I think once the tipping point happens, it's just a matter of the entire food chain switching to non-GMO, just as it switched to GMO over the last 18 years. So it's ultimately going to be a level playing field where non-GMO is going to be the norm.
Well, so I'm just stunned. This is the most, I'm so glad that you took time to talk to us and be a part of this Healthy Gut Summit. But I want people to also leave this talk understanding that you've spent every moment of your life fighting for our well-being, for the well-being of generations of children to come. Because if we don't stop, the Monsantos of the world and so on, we're just not going to even be here. And so I would like to thank you very, very much, Jeffrey M. Smith. Thank you for being the constant work that you do, for your brilliance, for the research that you've got, the amazing science behind, who can even doubt you from what you said today with all the research behind you. But I also want to ask everybody to please find $10 a month, whatever you can give, much, much more if you're one of those people that have been blessed with a huge amount of money. Don't sit on that. This is the time that we need to make a difference in the world. And go to responsibletechnology.org and give something to help in this movement. How much money do you need for this movement? Like $5 million, $20 million, $100 million? How much would you like to see there?
Well, our budget for the tipping point is, depending on the year, it's between $4 and $5 million per year for 5 years. And we have it budgeted out per targeted demographic. We have a program for animal feed. We have an education program for the food companies. It's all laid out in a master plan, in multiple spreadsheets, in proposals, etc. We're going with what we have, which is way below what we need. And so we've had to eliminate some of our targets for now. But as soon as the money comes in, we'll start the production. We'll hire the staff. And I deeply appreciate your request for your listeners, because actually we are looking at two futures. The biotech industry, their stated goal was to genetically engineer 100% of all commercial seeds in the world and patent them. And they have genetically engineered not just the 9 commercialized food crops, but virtually every other crop and livestock and fish and some level of the pipeline. So there's over 35 fish that are waiting to be approved. The one that's right up for approval now is salmon. There's even they want to release mosquitoes. It's not just the food supply. They want to release the trees. They want to eliminate the products of the billions of years of evolution and replace it with designer organisms, with designer genes designed for greater profit and control from these transnationals. And so we're looking at two futures, one where nature is replaced by companies like Monsanto, and one where we keep the integrity of nature. And it is bizarre, and it is crazy, and it is ironic, but it is true that protecting the genetic integrity of all future generations may come down to increasing sales of grape nuts in supermarkets. But that's unfortunately the way it works, and it's huge leverage.
Wow. Well, I think we got it. I know I did. I think every single person listening has got it, that this is a fight and we need to support you. And I think this is an absolutely perfect place to end this conversation. I want everybody to just take this to bed tonight. I want them to listen to this interview over and over and over again, pass it around to other people, and let's join you in this movement. I just can't thank you enough, Jeffrey, for doing this.
Thank you so much, Donna.